Alrighty, boys and girls, you know what time it is? That's right, it's triangle time. Time for Chapter 7, Section 3, Triangles. Let's check it out. So, there are two ways that we can classify triangles. The first method is by angle. This triangle here, every single one of the interior angles, all three of them, they're all acute. So guess what we call it? That's right, an acute triangle. All interior angles are acute, so the triangle is acute. Next up, what kind of angles in that triangle? That little box, if you said right, you're right. See what I did there? And what do we call this? A right triangle. And the next one, what kind of angle is that? If you said you're obtuse, that's right. Give yourself a pat on the back. What do you think we call this one? You got it. An obtuse triangle. And this has an obtuse angle. So far, not so bad. Look at the angles that are inside the triangle. If you have a right one, right triangle. Obtuse, obtuse triangle. If they're all acute, an acute triangle. Not bad at all. Now let's take a look at how to classify the triangles according to their sides. First up, we have a triangle where all the sides look to be about the same measure. They all look to be congruent. See these little markings that I put on each of the sides? These are actually congruency symbols, and if you see the same markings on multiple sides, that means that the sides that have those markings all have the same measure. So we can see here, since all three of the sides have those same markings, that all three of the sides are congruent. So, a triangle that has equal sides, we call that equilateral. Now, a trick to remember this, if you know your Latin root words, latus for lateral, side, and we have equal side, equilateral. People that are into sports, if you know a lateral pass is a pass to the side, equal side, equilateral. Hopefully that helps you out. If it doesn't, study the old-fashioned way. I tried. Next up, isosceles. Now, looking at this triangle, see that I have the congruency mark here and here, but I don't have one on the bottom? What that means is just two sides are congruent. So let's get the definition there. So, with an isosceles triangle, at least two sides are congruent. Notice the wording there, at least two sides are congruent. So, even though they say that, still make sure that if it has three sides congruent, you're calling this an equilateral triangle. Two sides congruent, isosceles. Most math teachers are going to want that, so keep that in mind. Now, a way to remember that. I had somebody tell me that this looked like Chuck from Angry Birds. If you don't know who that is, that's okay. But basically the person imagined these were eyes staring at you. And the student said, I get it. Isosceles. Isosceles. Now, I thought that was kind of silly, but I remembered it, and I have a feeling you will too. So if you remember isosceles, looks like eyes staring at you because we have two congruent sides. Hopefully that helps you out. Again, if it doesn't, study the old-fashioned way. The last one that we have to deal with is called a scalene triangle. Now here, all three sides have different measures. Notice that the markings are different for all three of the sides. They're different to indicate that all three sides are not congruent. And based on that, you can probably tell, scalene triangle, no congruent sides. Now, a way to remember this is look at the first five letters of the word scalene. What do you get? Scale. And what has scales? Fish. Now, when we look at the fish, the left and right side, not the same. Top and bottom, not the same. All the sides here are different, just like a scalene triangle. Both have scale, scales, scale, different sides, different sides. Again, I know it's a silly way to remember it, but it works for a lot of people. Do your best. If you have a better way to remember these, go ahead and throw it in a comment. Now, let's take a look at how we're going to use some numbers and look at some problems that we'll see in homework and tests. Now, before we go any further, very important thing you have to know is that in any triangle, the sum of the interior angles is always 180 degrees. I don't care if it's an equilateral, an isosceles, scalene, acute, right, obtuse, it doesn't matter. the sum of the interior angles always equals 180 degrees. For those of you that want to see this visually, I'll show you. In this triangle, A degrees, B degrees, and C degrees, and if we added all of these up, what would we get? You guessed it, 180 degrees. Now, what's going to happen, or how we're going to use this in math problems, is we're going to be given two of these three interior angles, and you're going to have to solve for the missing angle. You use this information in an equation knowing that all three of the interior angles add up to 180 and solve for the missing part. Let's take a look at a problem. In this problem, I have a triangle. I know this is 119 degrees, this is 43 degrees, and this is x degrees. And I want to solve for x. So, how are we going to do it? Well, we know that 119 degrees plus 43 degrees plus x degrees has to equal 180 degrees. So, we're going to simplify this and then solve this just like a problem from chapter 6. Take a look. Okay, so that's an example of a problem involving a picture. Now let's take a look at an example of a word problem. Okay, so in triangle ABC, the measure of angle A is 25 degrees and the measure of angle B is 108 degrees. What is the measure of angle C? Well, again, I know that all three of those angles, even without a picture, I know that they have to add up to 180 degrees. So let's take a look. 180 degrees equals the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C. The problem tells me the measure of angle A is 25 degrees and the measure of angle B is 108 degrees. C is what we need to find. So we solve. First, we simplify 25 plus 108, and we finish this up, and we find that C equals 47 degrees. Now, there's one other problem I want to show you that may be a little bit tricky for some of you, but once you see it, it'll be a piece of cake. Now, if you saw this problem and they said solve for x, the first thing some of you might think is, hey, you just told us that we were going to have two of the measures and we'd have to solve for the third, and I only see one measure here. But that's not entirely true. Remember, this little box means this is a right angle, and a right angle is 90 degrees. So I know this is 40 degrees, and this is 90 degrees, and that's my missing measure. For those of you who want to see it solved, here it is. And there we have it. X is 50 degrees. So, boys and girls, if you understood all those, you should be pretty set for this section. Good luck memorizing all the angle names and by classifying the triangles by angle and by side. And we'll see you in class.